So this video that I'm making is twofold. In the first instance, I would like to talk about the Advanced Welsh Baccalaureate qualification structure, and then I want to look at specifically the independent project assessment grid. So in front of you now, you can see the four components that allows the learners to develop and apply all of the essential and employability skills. But the assessment of each component will be focused on a specific skill. The following table details the specific skills and identifies the type of assessment for each component. So on the matrix grid here, you can see from the first column, there are 3 skills challenges: the Enterprise and Employability Challenge, the Global Citizenship Challenge, and the Community Challenge. And there is also the Year 2 individual project. Each of these skills challenges in the individual project are weighed differently in terms of the assessment structure. So the individual project is sort of the core part, makes up the core part of the structure of the qualification, with 50% there. Learners will be expected to do their individual project in year 2, where they've developed quite a lot of the assessed skills. The assessed skills for each of the skills challenges in the individual project are outlined here. And also, as you can see, for the last 2 columns, all of the skills challenges as well as the individual project are internally assessed and externally moderated as well, to keep everything fair and square. So my point really in emphasising the Welsh Baccalaureate structure there is for my Year 2 learners in particular that are studying for their individual project at the moment, to see that the overall grading, it's worth 50% of the overall grading for your Welsh Bac. So it's really important that you listen up and do well for your individual project. Thank you. So moving on, for my Year 2 A2 learners for the Advanced Welsh Baccalaureate certificate, here is the assessment grid for the independent project. Here you can see in the first column the learning outcomes, the first 4 learning outcomes, as there are 8 learning outcomes for the independent project altogether. So as you can see across the top as well, it says performance bands. And in your second column, that's band 1. So that's where you're getting marks 1 to 3 for LO1, etc. Band 2 is where the student has been able to gain between 4 and 6 points or marks then for LO1. And then band 3, which is where the learner has done very well and is able to pick up between 7 and 9 points for LO1, etc. So ideally, learners need to be aiming for band 3, so achieving between 7 and 9 points per learning outcome. Okay, so more specifically, coming to the first column again, LO1, this measures your understanding how to identify and focus the scope of an individual project. Okay, and what this means is it assesses your ability to focus your aims and objectives. So focusing on your subject area and then writing up your aims and objectives then, okay? And also an ability to focus the scope looks at your research skills and how effectively you can focus that and look at previous empirical research that has been written and how you include that into your introduction to focus the scope of your project. So LO1 refers to your setting the scene or the context of your subject in your introduction, and how you narrowly focus that down with your aims and objectives. Okay, so to achieve a band 3 between 7 and 9 points, you'd be looking at a detailed and well-reasoned introduction, identifying an effective focus and scope for the individual project, logical and appropriate and realistic aims and objectives. Okay, so it's looking at the context of your project. Okay, moving on. Learning outcome 2. This measures being able to select and plan research methods, resources and materials. So at band 3, 7 to 9 points, this is producing a comprehensive, well-reasoned and effective rationale describing appropriate research methods and materials to achieve the aims and objectives. So what this is looking at, this section in your IP focuses on your selected primary research methods and your secondary research methods. So basically it's looking at, are you using the primary research methods that are going to enable you to fulfill the requirements of your aims and objectives. So your questionnaires will need to reflect the structure and the content of your aims and objectives. And also your secondary research, looking into journal articles, using databases and search terms, ensuring that you are focusing on previous empirical research relative to your title and your aims and objectives. Moving on then to learning outcome 3, as outlined in learning outcome 3, first column. So the learner needs to be able to select, collate, reference and assess the credibility of information and numerical data. So if we move up to band 3, this is a detailed, effective and comprehensive research selecting, obtaining, collating and referencing appropriate, complex, secondary and primary information, detailed, effective and comprehensive evaluation of the credibility of sources, including the currency, validity and reliability. So this is essentially your ability to select, effective secondary data and assesses your ability to credibly assess the credibility of the resources. Okay, so if you can remember when you were in year 1 of your Welsh Baccalaureate journey and you did the Global Citizenship Project, task 1 involved an assessment of the credibility of the resources that you're using. And we looked at 2 different methods. One of them was the Ruru method and the other one was the CRAP method. Okay, so essentially what this method enabled you to do was to evaluate information effectively. Okay, so we looked at the currency and the timeliness of the information. When was the information published or posted? Has the information been revised or updated? Does your topic require current information, or will older sources work as well? And are the links functional, for instance? In terms of the relevancy of the data that you're using, secondary or primary, so you're looking at the importance of the information for your needs. So does the information relate to the topic or answer your question or your aims and objectives? Who is the intended audience of this source? Is the information an appropriate level? So is it, if it's too basic, don't use it. Or if it's too advanced for your needs, then you're giving yourself more work then. The authority. So for LO3, you want to question the authority of the source of the information. So who wrote, who published that information? Where does it come from? Is the information supported by evidence? Has the information been reviewed or refereed? Can you verify any of the information in the other sources or from personal knowledge? So are you able to cross-reference these sources? Is there consistency in the reporting then, okay? And also the purpose, the reason for the information, why the information exists. What is the purpose for the information? Is it to inform, to teach, to tell, to entertain, or to persuade, for instance, okay? Do the authors or sponsors make their intentions or purpose clear? Is the information fact, opinion, or propaganda? Okay, so be aware. And does the point of view appear objective or impartial? All right, so if you are using a database from Heritage, from our library catalogue, and using the journal articles, they are all highly credible journal articles and published reputably. As a tip there for you. So then we come to LO4, okay? And this measures your ability to analyse numerical data and display using digital techniques. So essentially, this is assessing the learner's ability to display your digital capabilities through Excel. So digitally displaying your data through bar charts, 3D graphs, scatter diagrams, and the more of a range of visual representations for your data collection that you have within your IP, your independent project, the more I can grade you in terms of LO4 outcome. So, you know, band 3, 7 to 9 points achieved. Detail, effective and comprehensive analysis of numerical data, appropriate and effective use of digital techniques to organise, store, manage and display numerical data, effective interpretation of the numerical results. So don't forget, you know, put everything through Excel, put your data into Excel and produce your bar charts and scatter diagrams, etc. And don't forget your X and Y axes and also your explanation for these visuals. What do these visual bar charts tell us about the data? What is significant about the data? Or perhaps insignificant about the data, okay? Effectively interpret that visual representation then, okay? All basic stuff, and you're all perfectly capable of doing and achieving all these learning outcomes and doing really well at this independent project. So in terms of LO5, be able to synthesize, analyze and use information and viewpoints. What this is referring to is the candidate's ability to assess and synthesize all the secondary and primary data collected. Okay, so you'll be researching a subject that is of interest to you, and there will be a whole host and a catalogue of previous research that has also been produced in associated areas with your with your interest, okay? So you need to be able to show in your IP independent project that you have been able to synthesize and select concisely the secondary previous research that has been written on your subject. So you only report on what is relevant to your project, okay? Band 3, 7 to 9 it shows that you've been able to be detailed and comprehensive and effective in understanding of the context. So you're able to select previous research and content from secondary materials and look at the detail and effectively present this so it effectively ties in with the context of your project and also the content of your, of your primary research, and does your secondary research back up or not confirm your primary research, for instance. LO6, be able to produce and present an outcome. So LO6 looks at the overall project, okay? Your overall, is it in a logical order? Band 3, 7 to 9, effective use of appropriate and complex skills and techniques when producing the outcome. Presentation of individual project outcome is appropriate, effective and outstanding quality. Content and meaning, communicated using language and terminology accurately, appropriately and effectively. So essentially it's looking at the overall layout of your project. Have you got your title, your aims and objectives, your rationale? Maybe you've got an hypothesis in there. Perhaps you've got you've got your introduction. Then you've got your research methods, your data collection, your analysis, your conclusion, and your appendix, for instance. Effectively and appropriately, all that information is in the correct place. And, for instance, in your research methods, you wouldn't be putting a critique of research methods that you haven't used, for instance, okay? But you would want a critique of the research methods that you have used, but you won't put that into your research methods section. We'd want you to put that into your discussion section, so the last part, one of the last parts of the IP, and you'd look at the limitations of your project. In looking at the limitations of your project, you can refer to the research methods that you've used and what are the typical weaknesses of those methods then. So you can do like an assessment of the pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses of your research methods and your data collection methods, or even your secondary, how you've done a literature review, for instance, and what search engines you've used. Have you used Google Scholar over Google, or perhaps you've used Yahoo? Explain what your reasons for that are. Essentially, it's logically presenting your independent project. And to what extent you've been able to adopt the jargon which is typical for your area or your discipline, okay? And LO6 is looking at, have you achieved what you've set out to achieve? So when you're writing your aims and objectives and when you're going through your research project, you are continuously wanting to refer back to your aims and objectives so that you are consistently staying on track, and that you can outline that overall you are achieving what you've set out to achieve. It could be that your hypothesis, for instance, if you have a hypothesis or a question in your title, hasn't been answered, or it nullifies your hypothesis. This is okay as well, as long as you report on that and explain in detail, comprehensively, using effective language used in that discipline, sometimes called jargon, and you outline answers for your aims and objectives. So it shows that you are setting out what you intended to set out and achieve. So LO7, be able to make judgments and draw conclusions. Okay, so sometimes as you're working through your data collection and making your judgments, and sometimes you will have plenty of conclusions to draw. So as you're going through the process, you're drawing conclusions, and this is okay. These should be drawn together at the end and written in a concise manner aimed at answering the title questions, aims or objectives or hypothesis, for instance, okay? So what are you finding? What conclusions are you drawing from your aims and objectives and from all your research? What are your findings? And you want to do well at this and gain 7 to 9 points at band 3. So here you would be detailed, relevant and well-reasoned judgments made addressing and focusing the scope of the individual project. Detailed, comprehensive and valid conclusions drawn with effective links to original aims. So after your discussion and you look at the ramifications of your results, you conclude. So you select all your conclusions and concisely write about them, and then you draw links to your aims and what does this mean? What do your conclusions mean? What does your research mean for your aims and objectives? What does it essentially mean for your area of study? And then conclusively, LO8, be able to evaluate your own performance in managing an individual project. So this essentially is you reflecting, being reflexive, thinking over what skills you've practiced in writing up and researching actively your independent project. So in this reflective evaluation, essentially what you want to do is look at all the learning outcomes for the independent project. So they're the 7 Welsh back skills, which are planning and organising, critical thinking and problem solving, digital literacy, literacy and numeracy. Okay, so these 7 areas for LO8, if you want to use these transferable skills as your headings and then reflect through your project and highlight where in your project you use planning and organising. Particularly you use planning and organising when producing your primary research or conducting your secondary research. So you had to organise a lot of data using databases, for instance, and planning in producing your aims and objectives. You had to think critically in looking through and assessing previous research, and in particular when reading over your primary results, you had to be critical in highlighting significant significances then, and looking at comparisons between age groups and your participants, for instance. This was your critical thinking, and it was also your problem solving as well. So even in writing up your aims and objectives and following through in the research process, you are essentially solving a problem, okay? And also digital literacy, using Excel to produce your digital graphics and your visuals. Use as many bar charts, scatter diagrams and pie graphs, etc. as you can, in order to do the best you can at digital literacy, at showing that you can explain and understand and represent your data, particularly your primary data, through bars and charts, etc. Literacy is used throughout because, of course, you're reading, you're assessing the whole time, understanding comprehensively, writing out your findings, etc. And also numeracy in terms of, quantitative, quant and qual research methods, and also your assessment of your bar graphs and things like that, and all your data collection. Okay, so yeah, LO8 is all about your own reflection. So you've got to show, in order to get band 3 between 7 and 9 points, you've got to show that you can detail, comprehensive and effective evaluation of your own performance and your own project management and problem solving process, effective and justified with valid reasoning. If you don't understand any of the 7 transferable skills, so planning and organising, critical thinking and problem solving, digital literacy or numeracy, Google a definition of critical thinking, for instance, and then paraphrase that critical thinking into your own words,